Welcome to a very special Beyond the Waves Celtic football show. My name is Graham Wilson, and joining me, as always now, he's become a fixture with the show. It is Dr. J, and Dr. J is joining us from Dallas, Texas today. Good morning, Dr. J.
Good morning, G. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Good morning to you, and it's great to be joined by you over these past several weeks. So much great feedback as well, and no surprise there. But we have a fantastic show for you today. We are joined by a very special guest. Obviously, it's certainly no surprise to many folks to talk about this topic, especially in light of the fact that Scottish football generally, and specifically Celtic as well, have taken a much more active role in trying to get into the Chinese market and try and capitalize on that. So today we are joined by Mark Dreyer. Mark has an extensive journalism background. He is currently based in Beijing, China, and has an extensive experience and perspective on this burgeoning Chinese market. He writes for, he blogs on the liningtower.wordpress.com, and we are very happy to have him today. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Well, it's actually evening my time, but I'm very well. Was 12 hours, now 13 at this time of year, because China, as you may or may not know, only has one time zone and doesn't have summertime. So that's how the government likes to run things here.
Wow. So you could literally have someone on the more rural, western areas where it could get dark at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or I guess 1 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah, not probably quite that bad, but you can certainly wake up at 10 a.m. in the morning can be pitch black. So they go by two time zones. They basically have Beijing time and then local time. So they run as normal, but they sort of, for official business, still have to go by the government clocks.
That is bleak, to say the least. But we are so glad that you joined us today. Now, Mark, I can tell by your accent that Mandarin may not be your native tongue. So tell us a little bit about yourself, about your writing background, and how you found yourself there in Beijing.
Well, just a quick history. Originally from York, so I'm a York City fan. You were playing the song "A Long Way to Paradise" earlier. Well, I can certainly know how that feels as a York fan. After university, I spent about 5 years at Sky Sports in London and was a reporter on the Soccer Saturday football show.
Oh, lovely.
And then actually I had met the lady who is now my wife in New York because I went over to run the New York Marathon and ended up moving over there for a couple of years. I worked for the burgeoning Fox Soccer channel, which was not quite as well. I don't know how you guys think of it these days, but it was probably less well developed back then.
Sure.
But it was a lot of fun. I worked for some other AP Sports as well, and then it was about 9 months before the Olympics, and my wife was setting up a company that was partly based in China, partly in the US. And as I said, it was the Olympics were coming up, and with my sports background, that was a big attraction, and so we went for a year just to see how things went, and it's been over 6 now, so still enjoying things.
Brilliant stuff. So you've been there for several years now. You have a unique perspective where you've come from obviously the UK, and you spent some time in America working for that's delightful. You're working for the Fox Soccer channel, as we like to say here in America. We're kicking the soccer ball around. Which has morphed into Fox Sports 1, and they still have Fox Soccer Plus. But you have a unique perspective where you can see things from both perspectives. You can see the potential, but you can also see what actually is taking place there on the ground. Not just in Beijing, but throughout China generally. Let me ask you, in terms of the consumer mindset there in China, the consumer behavior aspect. Do the Chinese people, do they buy football kits, scarves, hats, all of that? And I don't mean, listen, you can go anywhere on the face of the planet and you're going to see somebody in a Ronaldo or a Messi jersey. They are the Michael Jordan of, the 21st century. Let's not kid ourselves. But I'm talking about, just generally. I mean, do you see people with Chelsea strips, with, maybe a West Brom strip or some of the lesser known leagues? Or is that not so much of the sport mentality there in China?
You definitely see the top teams. You'll see a Chelsea. You wouldn't see a West Brom, for example. Nothing against West Brom, but I'm just trying to rack my brains. I mean, other than tourists who like to wear their football shirts all around the world. You'll see a lot of I say a lot. You'll see some Chinese strips. Never the national team. People hate the national team here. They're just so disillusioned because it's done so badly. But you'll see in Beijing, you'll see the Beijing team, and elsewhere you'll see the local city teams. But it's the usual suspects probably. The big European teams. Not too many Celtic, unfortunately, I have to say. But I mean, like I say, you'll see the Messis. The other thing is, from a commercial perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean anyone's spending any money on this because everything here is ripped off. I remember before one of the big tournaments, whether it was a World Cup or a Euro, I thought, well, I'm going to be getting up at 3 a.m. to watch some England games. I better have the right kit. And you just go online. You go, it's called Taobao, which is basically sort of like the eBay or an Amazon equivalent over here.
Yeah.
And I think I paid 38 yuan for a top, and it's 6 yuan to the dollar. Mm-hmm. And this was for a pretty good quality shirt and shorts. Mm-hmm. So obviously I wore both, to the pub every night.
Sure.
But what are we talking there? Like, obviously not very much less than $10. Well, a lot less than $10.
Right.
Nothing like the. It probably, you could probably tell it wasn't genuine, but it wasn't too bad. It really wasn't
passable, and especially in that environment where let's not kid ourselves. Most people are probably going to take that same opportunity and wear similar quality merchandise, similar quality kits. If you will. So I listen. If I were in your position, I would probably take up on that offer as well. And it's an interesting one. You mentioned you don't see too many Celtic kits over there. I mean, obviously the Irish diaspora maybe hasn't made it quite to the shores of China just yet. But it is an interesting one in terms of where the opportunities are. When these massive clubs highlight their marketing strategies and where they want to go and where they want to target, that so much of that comes from that merchandising revenue and the opportunity, if it's not there, especially in really the wheel well of counterfeiting, that certainly does take a hit in terms of whether or not teams are actually going to look at a place like China, no matter how many people they have. And you also mentioned, which I find fascinating, the Chinese people, they're not particularly keen on the national team there. Is you mentioned it's because they're a bit dreadful at the moment. There's also an issue of match fixing throughout Asia, and China is no exception to that. Does that play into sort of that malaise that the Chinese people have with their national team, or is it just based on purely performance and sort of the disgrace of not being better?
It's certainly in there. So at least it has been in the past. There were a lot of match fixing, along an ongoing investigation for a number of years, and there were some pretty hefty punishments handed out actually earlier this year. So Shanghai Shenhua, the team that Drogba and Anelka played for, started the season on -6 points. They had a big fine, and this was for stuff I think as much as 10 years ago. It finally came out. So, I mean, I'm an optimist. I'd like to think it's cleaned up, but it's certainly not, in a reasonably recent past that this has happened. One example, I interviewed once Ari Hahn, a Dutch player, played with some of the greats. He's got a particularly good goal on YouTube if you look him up. But he was the manager of Holland. He's a Dutch guy, but was the manager of China for a few years, about 10 years or so ago. Mm-hmm. And he was told, he had some real problems with the officials and the management because he wanted to pick the team that he thought should start, and he wanted to invite the players that he wanted to the training camps. But it was a lot of it was pay to play. So players would pay just to buy their spot on the roster in the training camp, and then again for the match, he'd pretty much be told, well, this is the lineup you're going to start with, and eventually he sort of walked out. He didn't want anything more to do with that.
Wow.
But that's at the national team level. I mean, of course, there's going to be less regimented you would have thought at a local level as well, and
Right.
the potential to be even worse as well. So hopefully that is in the past, but it wasn't
Mark,
too long ago that we were seeing that.
Go ahead, Dr. J.
Mark, what I wanted to ask you was I've read about 4 or 5 articles online about the whole issue with paying to play and match fixing, and there seems to be this groundswell. Of course, you never can believe things you read in the newspaper, no matter what country they're in, with people saying, well, he wouldn't give his real name, but he said this or something like that. And the comments that I'm reading are even parents are very, very wary of bringing their kids and putting them into football camps or academies because the managers who are there want the parents to pay for the kids to even make the team, let alone play. And is that something you're hearing also, that it's going down that far and now the numbers of kids that are signing up are dwindling? Is that something that you're seeing also?
I wouldn't necessarily say that dwindling numbers are specifically down to that, or even predominantly down to that. There's a lot of issues that the academic environment is so competitive in China, and to the extent that everything else is sort of cleared from the kids' schedules. You know, in the West, people think, well, exercise can help you if you have a healthy body, you have a healthy mind. Here, they'll have extra tutoring as soon as they come home from school. They'll put in advanced classes they really have no business being in. And any exercise is basically seen as time wasting. And so that, I'd say, is a much more serious issue in terms of kids not playing. But going back to your point about match fixing, I mean, I think people have made a fairly convincing case that if there's money to be made somewhere, then someone's going to be trying to fix a match. Mm. I'd like to think it doesn't happen on too wide a basis, but unfortunately, it probably does.
Yeah, and there's so much. Just
well,
go ahead.
Well, didn't there I just read Evergrande, or is that the team that just won the Club World, or is going to play in the club? Weren't they just relegated a couple of years ago for match fixing?
Yes, it was a few more years than that. They've just won their 3rd consecutive Super League title, so the top division. But before that, they'd just been promoted because they had been relegated. So yeah, it's not that. It's almost a different franchise now. Evergrande is the name of the real estate firm that came in and pumped a bunch of money, which is why they've suddenly done so well. And as you said, they've just won the Asian Champions League, so they're going to be in the Club World Cup. But yeah, things do change very quickly in China. So as much as I'm saying, well, it was only 5 years, 5 years or so ago, and I realise that's very, very recent, it is possible that it's kind of clean, that it's clean already. I don't want to be naive and think that it is across the board, but I think that fans are generally getting back on board, I think, with the league in the way that they weren't more recently. But confidence is pretty fragile because of that recent past, and it would only take a minor scandal, I think, for them to have serious problems again.
Yeah, and when you look to a wider example, I guess a higher scale example of that, obviously the first thing that everybody thinks about is Calciopoli, and certainly you see the dwindling attendances in Italy. Add that to the fact that many of the stadiums there are, they have the running tracks around them. They're just these soulless concrete sort of white elephants, really, from the World Cup over 20 years ago, and it's just now starting to build back their crowd. That's in Italy. I mean, and comparatively in China, that doesn't really have that fervent history in supporting football and things like that. You're right. I mean, one more scandal, and I mean, it just how much credibility is really left here. But yeah, let me ask you, in terms of how the Chinese people who are football supporters, who have a love for the game, and this is something that I'm always fascinated with as an American, and I always look to Europe, and there's constant comparisons between how we in America support our teams or how we consume sport and what goes on in Europe. Certainly in America, there's far less tribalism. I guess it's much more geographic, our loyalties here. It's not uncommon to have someone move from one city to another, although I would not be guilty of this ever. But in America, you can move from one city to another and then pick up that team, just straight off the bat. Do people in China have that same sort of tribal sensibility or mentality where, you mentioned that there was a real estate firm that bought a club and that became the name of the team. Do you have, is there this sort of, I don't want to say apathy, but is there this similar sense of, I guess detachment from tribalism as you have in America, or are those same sensibilities that you find in Europe also present in China?
Well, actually, geographically, people don't move around the country nearly as much because actually the registration, there's a thing called a registration permit called a hukou. It makes it very difficult for people to move cities. And so that's one just basic reason why they wouldn't necessarily switch geographical locations.
Right.
You do see a lot of ebb and flow as a rich company or a businessman comes in, pumps money into a club, and suddenly they get a bit of an attendance. People don't, I wouldn't say switch clubs. They might start going to the games and then, fall away again if that company withdraws their backing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'd say it's probably similar in that people here look to what they're doing in Europe and the way that fans behave. It's almost like they're trying to act as they think they're supposed to act because they've seen it on TV in the European leagues. So they have to do this sort of chants and that sort of face and sign or whatever. That's not to say it's all acting, but I think it's sort of like, well, this is how we're trying to recreate an atmosphere that we think is good.
Right.
We've seen it overseas, and so we're trying to do that here.
Yeah, as a casual MLS supporter, I can identify with that general that general template. Let's talk a little bit about the government, because obviously, as you described there, the Chinese government has a different relationship to its people, to its sport. How does the Chinese government feel about these foreign sports entities, these foreign sports leagues growing into their country, and what effects it might have on their populace?
Well, I guess as long as it doesn't threaten domestic competition, they wouldn't particularly mind so much. For example, you've got NBA, which is very much, apart from a couple of preseason games a year, it's very much a TV sport. And then you've got the CBA, the Chinese Basketball Association. That's the thing that people increasingly are going to attend in the venues. So there's no real direct clash. People can watch both on TV. I think as long as the Chinese government or the relevant authorities are making their money, or they're not feeling threatened by someone else taking their money, then it's going to be at least tolerant, if not supportive.
Sure. Now, let's throw out a hypothetical here, or just a general case study. Obviously, us being Celtic supporters, this is Celtic podcast. How would the government respond to a club like Celtic? And let's be honest, we have supporters who are quite vocal about Irish independence, fighting for independence in general. What would be the response in your mind that the Chinese government would have to that? I mean, they would certainly be nervous, or would this be something that, again, there isn't a fervent Irish diaspora in China? What is there anything to compare this situation to, or just base your thoughts on?
Okay, I mean, I think. To Celtic fans, it's probably more of a key part of their identity than outsiders would necessarily realise.
Sure.
Because there's so many other things about Celtic and that people would jump on from an outside perspective. But separatism and independence is an extremely, extremely delicate topic in China. I mean, you have all these different regions that either have or sort of have a slightly different, for example, you've got Hong Kong and Macau,
right,
part of China, but they have this one country, two systems mantra that is used to govern.
Right.
Then you have Taiwan, which is a whole nother, China very much considers it just another province.
Of course.
The Taiwanese people think that they're a completely separate country and they issue their own passports.
Right.
Then you have the areas that, the Western press will certainly mentioned from time to time, places like Tibet, Xinjiang in the west. You've got Inner Mongolia in the north,
right, where
there's always rumblings of separatism or independent thrusts there. So it's something that China is very, very, very worried about, and has been for years. And interestingly, the people, when I first got to China, when I was just interested to find out how people felt about this, and they would always say to me, as a Brit, well, what about if Wales wanted to separate and become independent? And my response was, well, if they wanted to do that, then that's fine. That's okay. That's up to them. From the Chinese mindset, and they've been brought up basically saying that China is a whole and it cannot be separated at any cost. That was completely alien, because they were thinking, well, how can you split up? They do certainly fear if one area splits off, then all these other regions might want to follow.
Right.
And of course, there's some other issues as well in terms of the natural resources of a lot of these places. You've got the water in Tibet and the resources in Xinjiang. It would have some real effect from that point of view as well.
Sure. And Dr. J and I were having a discussion prior to coming on the air about the government's efforts to crack down on counterfeiting. Specifically, we find that here in America, where there is a burgeoning and a huge counterfeiting industry, really that's come up, and it seems as though every few years, the government does something. Well, Dr. J, you had a specific thought around that. Do you want to ask Mark about that?
Yeah, Mark, I was curious. How much does the government really look into what's going on as far as producing fakes? I mean, the other day, my son said, "Hey, Dad, you can buy me these new what look like leopard skin Ronaldos that are out there, and they're really cool Nikes, and they're only $59." And I was like, "What the hell is this?" And I'm looking, and it's they're total fakes. And I'm like, "Okay, Max, I'd rather have you play barefooted than wear this." I mean, and the point the reason why I say that is because the other day there was this comment on this article on CNN about how the U.S. government, Chinese government worked together on cracking down on $350 million worth of goods. Now they shared information, but the police didn't work together. So they found some stuff in Anchorage, Alaska, some stuff in Beijing, and some stuff in New Orleans. And for $350 million, one guy was arrested, and he was some dude on what's in the U.S. called Craigslist selling fake Beats headphones. Now, I find that ironic.
That's a huge score.
I mean, that's the one thing. I know, right? Because he's on Craigslist, I assume, but he didn't pay for it. It was pure profit. But
seems reasonable.
I'm just curious. When it comes down to that, I ask because, if this relationship is to last 10 years, and we do happen to sell some kits. Currently, our Nike deal with Celtic is they own the rights to the crest, and they paid us at one point in time a certain amount of money. Would it be worth them looking? I'm just looking, trying to have you obviously look in your crystal ball and explain. But do you think it's even worth attempting to sell goods there when you have that much rampant level of counterfeiting? And the reason why I ask is because, as you know, working within Sky, the dollar amounts paid to watch Scottish teams play when it comes down to TV money is minuscule compared to what BT Sport and what Sky are paying the teams in England. So for Celtic, a ripped off a shirt may not sound like who cares, but for Celtic, that's the difference between keeping a player and having to sell them because of the turnover or the profit margin.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, is it really worth it, for Celtic to go in and really have a good faith effort towards expanding merchandising in China? Is it worth it?
Yeah, a lot of interesting points there. I think, first of all, I really can't see the Scottish League, Celtic and all the other clubs selling enough merchandise there. People just aren't going to buy the real thing. So they're not really losing out in that sense, because if they're asked to pay full cost, it's just not going to sell, like full stop.
Yeah.
I think if people are buying the fake ones, as much as that might anger people back home, you have to see from a China perspective, you have to just see that as, well, that's building the brand. If more people are wearing a Celtic shirt because they got it off the back of a lorry, or they paid, a few dollars for it in the local market, well, then that's good, because then someone else says, who's that team? And then maybe there's a bit more, awareness about the team, and perhaps that has a knock-on effect further down the line. But in terms of selling the real shirts, like with the prices that they are these days, as I was saying before, the Scottish teams currently are so far down the pecking order, I don't really think it's going to affect. I see what you're saying about the TV money being so much smaller in Scotland, and so this could potentially be a much larger percentage of their overall income. But I still don't think it's necessarily anything to worry about. I think there are too many other issues that would come before that.
Now, have any of the other European leagues come into China? I mean, specifically, the Bundesliga, I believe, had just made some waves about trying to crack into the, as we always refer to it, the burgeoning Chinese market. We've seen Real Madrid and Barcelona specifically publish studies, that they had conducted about the marketing opportunity. Have any of these sides, these Goliath teams that have done, the summertime tours of throughout Asia and in China, have any of them been successful in generating a large or a significant at all amount of revenue from these efforts?
In terms of the leagues, like just having a presence there, or specifically the preseason tours?
Well, the preseason tours in the context of raising the brand and generating revenue for the club. I mean, that's always going to be the goal of these clubs going over there, right? They want to go over, they want to have the kids wearing their kits, they want people to turn out for the games in those tours, but they also want people watching on the pay-per-view situation that they've arranged there in China, as it were. Has any of that been successful at this point?
In a word, no. And they've pretty much all tried. I think, for example, take the English teams. The high point was 2003, and there was a game between Everton and Man City. And it was a pretty mediocre game, but there was Sun Jihai and Li Tia, one Chinese player on each side. And the numbers were reportedly, the spectrum was huge, but it seemed to be hundreds of millions of people were watching that particular game. And then a few years further on, this was because it was broadcast on CCTV, which really does have a massive monopoly on the TV market, because it's the one government-controlled national broadcaster. Right. They had the deal to broadcast the English Premier League. Then that fell apart, I think because CCTV, from their point of view, was so powerful, and the EPL was so used to everyone just throwing trillions at them, and so the two sides were so far apart. When they went off the air, or when they went off the national airwaves, the German and the Italian leagues sprung up in their place. And then you saw those leagues getting a bit more traction, a bit more popularity. The players would become a bit more famous than the teams. In terms of the preseason tours, this summer we saw hardly anyone come to China, but a lot of teams come to Asia. But they've just tried in China, and the teams want too much money because they think China has 1.3 billion people again. Right. You need to pay us a guaranteed X million to play. The promoters basically have tried to guarantee this, and they've failed. So they've ended up taking huge losses in the past because they can't sell. Chinese fans want to see Wayne Rooney. They want to see the top players. Right. They don't want to see the third string or the youth team. Right. And so, with the prices that the promoters need to charge to guarantee the club their X million, then they can't sell enough tickets to make it worthwhile. Barcelona were going to have a game pre-season that was cancelled. The others didn't even bother arranging it. They just went to the nearest they came was Hong Kong. Yeah. Where, as you mentioned, they have a semi-autonomous situation where, that might be worth the return on their investment. And that gets me back into, what we can expect as Scottish football supporters and specifically Celtic supporters. They announced that the potential for this TV deal that the SPFL, as it's now known, struck with China was potentially £60 million. How realistic is it that we're going to see this £60 million? I mean, especially in light of, I believe
from
20 million, right?
It was 20 million, and then I heard a report of 60 perhaps, and it was spread out over a period of 10 years. There were a lot of there were a lot of ifs, and if that happens, and maybe and things of that nature. My understanding of the CCTV arrangement is it's I believe it's £1. In order to subscribe to the games, or some sort of arrangement similar to that. But I guess my question is, how realistic is it that we as Scottish football supporters are going to see any sort of return on this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's obviously the one the one that the people who are announcing the deal don't necessarily want to be asked. Even at the max, spread out over 10 years amongst all the clubs, it's not a huge amount of money, is it? Now, it's not clear in terms of how exactly it's being generated, whether it's a pay-per-view, but Chinese people don't pay for a lot of genuine merchandise. I mean, they do, and they're increasingly they will when it comes to phones and so on, but they certainly don't pay for content. Whereas it would be illegal to download music in the West, in China, the business model is set up so that it's done through advertising. So you can download all your music for free as long as you go to the approved sites. A lot of people are trying to get pay-per-view TV to start in China, but it's really, really early. We're right in the initial stages. And something to watch, actually, just in about a week or so from now, Manny Pacquiao is going to be fighting in Macau, and this is a big HBO and Bob Arum Top Rank thing. He's going to try and launch pay-per-view boxing in China, and he's expecting, of course, a fraction of 1.3 billion people to pay whatever the $5 or whatever it is he's charging. I wouldn't be surprised if that falls massively flat on its face, just because there is no history of people paying out for this content. And as we've seen in the West, it does take time. It takes time to get traction in the UK and the cable channels in the US as well. Basic cable is expensive enough, as you guys know, without having to pay extra for these one-time events.
Sure.
And then, of course, with all the other offerings, where is Scottish football going to rank? In the Chinese consumers' demand list, like of all the clubs they want to watch, where is Celtic? Just looking objectively from a Chinese football fan. Again, you have to be Chinese, you've got to be a football fan, and then you have to pay for Celtic on top of that. It's not going to be too many people.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and then add into that. My understanding is, not just the sort of the Chinese supporters mentality, but throughout Asia, I think the purveying concept is that the supporters there are more interested in players. For instance, if a player, if you're a Ronaldo fan and he moves from, Manchester United to Real Madrid, you're all of a sudden going to become a Madrid supporter. That's really the more purveying, a dominant theme, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely much more about the individuals and the celebrities. You'll see on the Chinese Twitter called Sina Weibo, the big followings are the individual players, Ronaldo and Messi and so on. The clubs will have some pretty big backings as well, but it's the Beckham. I mean, Beckham's now retired. He was all but retired when he first came over on one of his 3 visits this year. Right. He signed a deal. I don't know if you guys saw that, but to be an ambassador, basically a non-playing ambassador for the Chinese Super League. Right. Was a kind of bizarre role.
And he just got mobbed, I saw, in the pictures and the video. They had to essentially shut down one of his appearances because there was just, this massive turnout.
Yeah, there was a stampede in Shanghai earlier this year. It's funny, but, people are ending up in hospital. It's like sort of the boy band arriving at the airport scene. Yeah. But that is definitely what happens here, and so people are more into the individual; they're into the celebrity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. Speaking of the individual,
hey, Graham, can I add something?
Sure, please.
Graham, I wanted to add something. And Mark, you hit something right on the head that I think supporters who are going to listen to this broadcast really, really, especially American supporters, really, really identify with. You said that as cable's expensive, and who's going to want to pay over and above that? And I know the answer to that question, and that is the Celtic board believing that everyone's going to act like Americans and Australians and pay for Celtic TV.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And I think they go out there thinking, hey, listen, if we could just get like Bob Arum, just a percentage of people to go ahead and do this, because all of a sudden now they're going to be Celtic supporters. I think for us, we're the dummies paying for, because I pay for not just cable, but I also pay for the latest incarnation of Fox Soccer. And then on top of that, because they only give me some of the Celtic games, now I got to also pay for, Celtic TV. So I mean, I just want people to understand that may be what people are thinking over in the boardroom. But as you said, Mark, I don't see that necessarily translating into dollar signs down the road for us coming out of Shanghai.
No, I mean, it's probably great news for Celtic, for Scottish expats or Celtic fans who have moved to China, but then they've probably already been watching it on a VPN or on one of the other sites anyway. I don't know that they're necessarily going to have to pay up. And how many are they? They're certainly not the 60 million that Alex Salmon basically said 60 million will watch, and it's like it's just simply not going to happen. There's so many examples of this that sort of amuse and anger me in equal measure. There was a Huddersfield Town. We're trying to launch a big China initiative earlier this year, and they had a picture on their website. I don't know how I came across the story, but there were three international business guys standing around a map of the world with a cheesy grin on their face and pointing up at the map, and their fingers were all pointing at China, as if to say, we're going to China and we're going to bring back all the money. And it was like, well, okay, there's nothing to stop them trying, but it just doesn't work. You can't just go to China and say, okay, people, we're whoever, please watch or please give us money. Everyone's been trying that for years and it hasn't worked. Whether it's, you look at all the companies, whether it's, Google or eBay or companies like that who pretty much left China with their tails between their legs because they've lost so much money trying to do this. I think that's actually one thing to be, as long as Celtic aren't paying out money for this, it can't be seen as a negative. I mean, even if it's 20 million over 10 years, well, it's still 20 million that they weren't going to get.
Right.
So there don't appear to be any downsides, really, from what I can see. I would just really, really temper the expectation as to what this deal could lead to. Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point here. I think many people on the surface, if you don't have really the understanding of what all of these adjunctive factors that are playing into this are, you can see that 1.3 billion and say, right, this is it. Look at what happened with Cardiff a couple of years ago, where they changed the color of their strips. They alienate their core support in order to try and reach out to a market that is not necessarily overly likely to gravitate towards Wales. It's a bit mind-boggling, and it does tend to provoke sort of knee-jerk reactions. But it's important to maintain perspective throughout all this. Like you said, if you do indeed bring in the 20 million over 10 years, of course, that's 20 million that would come in handy that you wouldn't have had. But we don't want to get we don't want to have our expectations in a place where that would lead us to chasing good money after bad, if you know what I mean, and investing all sorts of money and resources into growing something that, may not be a fruitful source. But, another element of this, and I think, a big theme of our discussion today is talking about the individual and specifically the players. What Celtic have been rumored to be involved with is bringing in a Chinese player once again. Obviously, we have a bit of a history there with Douay, as well as Zheng Zi, who's had some success as of late within China. But this player apparently is a prospect, a left-sided midfielder, and I'm praying that I'm going to get this right. It's Zhang Zishi.
Not bad. You got the first one right. Well, Zhang Shijia.
Okay.
But you know what? Everyone called him Zhang Zi, and that's not what they call him over here at all. So people, to be honest, as long as you all know that you're talking about the same player, the pronunciation is pretty varied.
Okay.
He's a young player. He got the recently got the Young Player Award in the Chinese Super League. He's got about 7 or so caps for the national team. He plays for Beijing. He's definitely at the stage where he needs to play, and if he can get that at Celtic, well then fantastic. It would be great for his development. It would be great for Chinese soccer. The Chinese people would certainly be very interested to see him play. That is one reason why Chinese fans may actually turn on and watch Celtic games. They may even pay some money to do it. Again, he's not the biggest star because he's still a young kid. But no one's going to pay to see him sit on the bench. And there's been so many examples of Chinese and Asian players. I mean, there was a few years back, Junichi Inamoto went to Arsenal. He was one of the best players in Japan. And, you know, he would almost always get on the bench, but he'd maybe get like a minute or two at the end if he was lucky. There were Japanese tourists. He was so big. Japanese tourists would turn up, and there would be a little group of fans at every game at Highbury. To see him effectively just ruin his career. You know, there was a Chinese kid who played for Man U. I think he maybe got one sub appearance. Dong Fangjua a few years back. So that would be the big shame. It's very hard to see. It's impossible to judge how he would fit in without him making the leap. But if again, it's always the big if. But if he was to do well in Celtic and in Scotland, then people might actually tune in not in their droves, but he would certainly make some headline news. You know, he might be on the news reports, and Celtic would certainly get more of a profile over here, which could only help the club. But it's more likely, just based on the model that we've seen many times in the past, that he's not going to get regular first team football, and it kind of backfires.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen it firsthand, as I mentioned. I mean, Zhang Zi, you know, the only thing he left Glasgow with was, I think, one of Lee McCulloch's studs stuck in his calf still. You know, and we're always hoping that, you know, when players come in, especially from far off lands, they're going to have success. I mean, obviously, it helps them settle to a different land, to a different culture, to a different language. You know, some success on the front end, especially, always helps to settle the nerves and to you know, get the confidence going. So, you know, we're always hoping for that from our perspective, but certainly, you know, we're hoping that you know, that broadens the market, so to speak, so that, as you mentioned, more people in China would be interested and you know, be compelled to check out the club, because that's, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're interested in. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us about your blog. It's fascinating work that you're doing, The Leaning Tower, and you talk about, you know, the business aspect of Chinese sport and Asian sport in general. Tell us a little bit about it, where we can find it, and, you know, some of the themes that you key on.
Well, as you said, yeah, it's the Leaning Tower. .wordpress.com, and it's probably tries to be a little bit too clever for its own good. Li-Ning is the name of basically the Chinese Nike. It was named after a very famous Chinese Olympian. He's the guy who actually lit the torch at the Beijing Olympics. Li-Ning, Lining. So just a play on the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the Leaning Tower. It's probably not the best brand to have chosen, because they're going through some very tough economic times of their own at the moment. But they are one of the big sportswear brands over here. I just try and look at some interesting stuff that's happening and talk about stuff that might be interesting to people overseas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating stuff. I mean, not just from a footballing perspective, but, you know, from a wide-ranging sport perspective as well. Obviously, as we get more into the Olympic times, it's interesting to keep tabs on, you know, the different cultures, how they prepare, and what their mindset is, you know, going into, you know, these massive sporting events. So we will definitely be following you and keeping an eye out. But Mark, thank you so much again for joining us today. Fascinating stuff, and hopefully we can call on you again in the future, you know, as this deal develops, and you know, hopefully we can bring this Chinese lad over to Celtic and develop him. So all the best.
Absolutely. No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers, Mark. And Dr. J, thank you so much, as always, for joining us.
Oh, yeah, it's been a blast. Thanks for having me on. That. This is really great. And Mark, I really have enjoyed reading your blog, and that's where we initially discovered, hey, listen, we might have somebody a little smarter than us about China, so that would be a good thing. Let's go ahead and get them on. It's a good idea. So it worked out perfect. We're just reading reports, and you actually live there, so it worked out perfect.
Yeah, excellent stuff.
Thank you.
It's always a lengthy journey trying to find people that are smarter than us. Obviously joking. So, Mark, thanks again. All the best, and hopefully we'll catch up with you soon.
Great. Okay.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
And for Dr. J, as well as our special guest, Mark Dwyer, my name is Graham Wilson, and taking us out, as always, is Shane McGowan and the Pogues. And with the absence of any sort of club football this weekend, I'm a bit unsure as to when the next show might be. It might be next week when I'm in Glasgow. Stay tuned. In the meantime, hail, hail, and keep the faith. We'll talk to you soon.
The island, it is silent now, but the ghosts still haunt the waves. And a torch lights up a famished man who fortune could not save. Did you work upon the railroads? Did you ride the streets of crime? Were your dollars from the White House? Were they from the 5 and dime? Did the old songs start to cheer you? And did they still make you cry? Did you count the months and years? Or did your teardrops quickly dry? I know that it was not to be on a copping ship. I came here and I never even got so far that they could change my name. Thousands are sailing across the western ocean to a land of opportunity that some of them will never see. Fortune prevailing across the western ocean, their bellies full, their spirits free. They'll break the chains of poverty and they'll dance. In Manhattan's desert twilight, in the dead of afternoon, we stepped hand in hand on Broadway, like the first man on the moon. And a blackbird broke the silence as he whistled, it's so sweet. And in Brendan Behan's footsteps, I danced up and down the street. And we said goodnight to Broadway, giving it our best regards. Took our hats to Mr. Cohen, dear old Times Square's favourite bird. Then we raised a glass to JFK and a dozen more besides. When I got back to